What happens when the person you trust the most becomes the one who could break you completely? Sophia thought she had everything figured out: a successful business partnership with her best friend Daniel, a stable relationship that promised safety, and walls carefully built to keep her heart protected. She believed that friendship and love could never mix, that some lines should never be crossed. But life has a way of shattering our carefully laid plans. One devastating betrayal would leave her vulnerable. One tender moment would spark a fire she never saw coming, and one kiss would change everything she thought she knew about love, friendship, and herself. Sometimes, the person meant to catch us when we fall has been waiting to love us all along. If this story speaks to you, leave a like, subscribe to our channel, and tell us in the comments, where are you listening to this story from? Your support is what keeps this channel alive and these stories coming to life. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Visionary Creative, casting golden streaks across the polished conference table where Sophia Chen sat reviewing client proposals. Her dark hair was pulled back in a loose bun, and she unconsciously twirled a pen between her fingers, a habit Daniel had come to recognize as her thinking pose. "The Henderson campaign needs more emotional depth," she murmured, not looking up as Daniel Martinez walked into the room carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. He set one beside her laptop, the familiar ritual they'd perfected over 7 years of partnership. "Double shot, oat milk, just a touch of vanilla," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "And I already know what you're going to say about Henderson. Their brand story lacks authenticity." Sophia finally looked up, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Have I become that predictable?" "Predictably brilliant," Daniel replied, his warm brown eyes crinkling with amusement. "It's why we work so well together." The easy banter between them filled the conference room as naturally as breathing. They had built Visionary Creative from nothing more than a shared vision and 2 laptops in Daniel's cramped studio apartment. Now, their agency occupied an entire floor of a downtown high-rise with 23 employees and a client roster that read like a who's who of successful brands. "Remember when we thought landing the Morrison Group would make us legit?" Sophia laughed, gesturing toward the wall where their first major contract hung framed. "You were so nervous you spilled coffee all over your presentation notes. And you improvised the entire pitch from memory," Daniel finished, shaking his head at the memory. "I knew right then that you were going to change my life." There was something in his tone, a subtle shift that made Sophia glance up sharply. But Daniel was already flipping through marketing reports, his expression neutral and professional. They had rules, unspoken but ironclad. Business stayed business. Friendship stayed friendship. The line between them remained clear and uncrossed because they both understood what was at stake. Too many partnerships had crumbled under the weight of complicated feelings. Too many friendships had been sacrificed on the altar of failed romance. "The Caldwell pitch is at 3, Sophia said, redirecting her attention to safer ground. "Are you ready to charm them with your authentic storytelling changes everything speech?" "Hey, that speech landed us 6 figures last month," Daniel protested, but his grin was infectious. "Besides, you're the one who perfects the numbers until they're impossible to argue with. We're a team." A team. The words settled between them with comfortable familiarity. That's what they were. That's what they'd always been. Business partners who happened to be best friends, who could finish each other's sentences during client meetings, and who instinctively knew when the other needed space or support. "I still can't believe we pulled off the Zenith campaign," Sophia said, leaning back in her chair. 3 weeks to completely rebrand a company? We must have been insane. "Insanely determined," Daniel corrected. "You worked 18-hour days and somehow still managed to keep everyone motivated. I watched you turn chaos into pure creative magic." The admiration in his voice was unmistakable, and Sophia felt a flutter of something she quickly pushed away. "Partnership appreciation," she told herself. "Nothing more." "We both worked those hours," she replied. "That's what partners do." Their assistant, Maya, knocked on the glass door before entering. "Your 10 o'clock is here," she announced. "And Daniel, your interview with Marketing Weekly is confirmed for Thursday." As Maya left, Sophia turned to Daniel with raised eyebrows. "Marketing Weekly? Since when do you do interviews without telling me?" Since they specifically requested to speak with the creative genius behind Visionary's most innovative campaigns, Daniel said, making air quotes. I tried to tell them it should be both of us, but they insisted on individual perspectives. Just don't let them pit us against each other, Sophia warned, though her tone was light. The last thing we need is some journalist trying to create drama where none exists. Never, Daniel said firmly. We're unbreakable, remember? 7 years and counting. Unbreakable. Sophia liked the sound of that. It felt solid, dependable, qualities that had been in short supply throughout most of her life before Daniel. Growing up with parents who fought more than they spoke, she'd learned early that relationships were fragile things, prone to shattering without warning. But this partnership with Daniel was different. Built on mutual respect, shared goals, and a friendship deep enough to weather any storm. They'd survived client disasters, financial stress, and the inevitable growing pains of building a business together. They'd celebrated victories and mourned losses, always standing side by side. Earth to Sophia, Daniel's voice broke through her thoughts. You're doing that thing where you disappear into your own head. Just thinking about how far we've come, she admitted. Sometimes it still feels surreal. The best is yet to come, Daniel said, and something in his expression made her heart skip unexpectedly. I can feel it. Before she could analyze that feeling further, their first client of the day arrived, and they seamlessly shifted into professional mode. But as the meeting progressed, Sophia found herself stealing glances at Daniel, noting the way his hands moved when he explained concepts, the passionate intensity in his voice when he talked about their work, the easy confidence he projected. Focus, she told herself sternly. This is exactly the kind of thinking that ruins partnerships. But as Daniel caught her eye across the table and flashed her that familiar conspiratorial smile that said, "We've got this," Sophia couldn't quite shake the feeling that something fundamental was about to shift in their carefully balanced world. The client meeting ended with handshakes and promises of a follow-up call, leaving them alone in the conference room once again. Daniel loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, a gesture so familiar it had become part of Sophia's daily landscape. That went well, he said, gathering the scattered papers. Johnson seemed genuinely excited about the rebranding concept. More than excited, Sophia agreed, watching the way afternoon light caught the subtle gold flecks in Daniel's dark hair. Did you see his face when you pitched the community engagement angle? Pure magic. Our magic, Daniel corrected, moving closer to help her organize the client files. His cologne, something woody and warm that she'd helped him choose 3 Christmases ago, filled the space between them. I couldn't do this without you, Soph. You know that, right? The sincerity in his voice made her pause. She looked up to find him studying her with an intensity that seemed to see straight through all her carefully constructed professional walls. For a moment, the air between them felt charged with something unnamed, something that made her pulse quicken unexpectedly. Daniel, she started, not sure what she intended to say. What? He asked softly, still holding her gaze. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility and danger in equal measure. Sophia felt herself leaning slightly forward, drawn by an invisible force she'd spent years pretending didn't exist. Then her phone buzzed against the table, shattering the spell. Michael's name flashed on the screen, and reality crashed back over her like cold water. I should take this, she said quickly, reaching for the phone with hands that trembled slightly. Daniel stepped back, his expression unreadable. Of course, I'll be in my office if you need anything. As he walked away, Sophia answered the call, but her eyes followed his retreating figure. Something had almost happened just then, something that could have changed everything between them. And the most terrifying part was how much a small, hidden corner of her heart had wanted it to. Something that might test just how unbreakable they really were. The soft jazz music drifted from the restaurant's speakers as Sophia twirled her wine glass, watching the deep red liquid catch the candlelight. Across from her, Michael Hayes cut his steak with precise movements, his architect's hands steady and sure. Everything about him radiated the kind of calm confidence that had first drawn her to him 8 months ago. The Pemberton project is finally moving forward, Michael said, his voice carrying that familiar note of satisfaction. 3 years of planning, and we broke ground yesterday. That's wonderful, Sophia replied, genuinely pleased. I know how much that project means to you. Michael reached across the table, covering her hand with his. His touch was warm, reassuring, exactly what she'd been looking for after years of emotional chaos. What about you? How's the agency treating you this week? Busy as always. Daniel and I landed 2 new clients, and we're working on a campaign that could really put us on the map. She paused, noting how Michael's expression shifted almost imperceptibly when she mentioned Daniel's name. Sorry, I know I talk about work too much. Not too much, Michael said, though his smile seemed forced. Just, Daniel features in a lot of your stories. Sophia felt a slight tension creep into her shoulders. He's my business partner. We spend most of our time together. I know that, Michael said quickly, squeezing her hand. And I admire what you two have built. It's just that sometimes I wonder if there's room for anyone else in that partnership. The comment stung more than it should have, and Sophia found herself pulling her hand back slightly. Michael, you know that's not fair. My relationship with Daniel is purely professional. Is it? The question hung in the air between them, heavier than Michael had probably intended. Of course it is, Sophia said firmly, though something in her chest fluttered with uncertainty. Daniel and I have been friends for 7 years. If there was going to be something romantic between us, don't you think it would have happened by now? Michael's expression softened, and he reached for her hand again. You're right. I'm sorry. I guess I just get a little jealous sometimes of how easily you two work together. The way you finish each other's sentences, the way you light up when you talk about your projects. That's just professional chemistry, Sophia insisted, but even as she said it, she remembered the moment in the conference room earlier that week, the way Daniel had looked at her, the electricity that had sparked between them before Michael's call interrupted. She pushed the memory away. That had been nothing. A moment of exhaustion, maybe, or stress from the demanding client schedule. It certainly hadn't been attraction. Besides, she continued, steering the conversation back to safer ground, what we have is different. It's real. It's stable. You make me feel peaceful. The word felt right as it left her lips. Peace. That's what Michael offered her. A love without storms, without the devastating highs and lows that had characterized her past relationships. With Michael, she never had to wonder where she stood or worry about having her heart shattered without warning. Peaceful, Michael repeated, his smile returning. I like that. You know what I love about us, Sophia? We make sense together. No drama, no complications, just 2 people building something solid. Exactly, Sophia agreed, feeling the tension in her shoulders ease. This was why she'd chosen Michael. This steady, predictable affection that didn't threaten to consume her or leave her vulnerable to devastation. They finished dinner in comfortable conversation, Michael telling her about his latest architectural drawings while she shared stories about their quirky new intern who had accidentally sent a client proposal in Comic Sans font. The evening felt familiar, safe, like slipping on a perfectly fitted pair of comfortable shoes. Later, as Michael walked her to her car, his arm draped casually around her shoulders, Sophia reflected on how different this felt from her previous relationships. No racing heart, no desperate need to be with him every moment, no fear of losing herself in someone else's expectations. Dinner tomorrow? Michael asked, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. There's a new place downtown I'd like to try. I'd love to, but Daniel and I have a late client dinner, Sophia said automatically. Maybe Friday? She caught the slight tightening around Michael's eyes again. Another client dinner? That's the 3rd one this week. It's how we build relationships, Sophia explained, feeling oddly defensive. The Morrison Group expects this kind of attention, especially with the new campaign launch coming up. Of course, Michael said, but his voice carried a note of resignation. Friday it is then. As Sophia drove home through the quiet city streets, her phone buzzed with a text message. Without thinking, she glanced at the screen at a red light and saw Daniel's name. Hope the dinner with Michael went well. Don't forget we have the Caldwell revisions to review first thing tomorrow. Also, I grabbed those print samples you wanted to show them. Sweet dreams, Soph. A smile tugged at her lips before she could stop it. Even when she wasn't at the office, Daniel was thinking ahead, making sure they stayed on top of every detail. It was one of the things she most appreciated about their partnership, how naturally they anticipated each other's needs. She typed back quickly, "You're the best partner a girl could ask for. See you bright and early." Only after she'd sent the message did she realize that her heart had done a little skip when she saw his name on her phone. The same kind of skip that used to happen in the early days with Michael, but that had faded into comfortable contentment somewhere along the way. Just professional appreciation, she told herself firmly as she pulled into her apartment complex. Nothing more than gratitude for a reliable business partner. But as she rode the elevator up to her floor, Sophia couldn't quite shake the feeling that she was lying to herself about something important, something that made her feel both excited and terrified in equal measure. In her apartment, she kicked off her heels and poured herself a glass of wine, settling onto her couch with Michael's goodnight text still glowing on her phone. "Had a wonderful time tonight. You looked beautiful as always. Sweet, predictable, safe." Yet her mind kept wandering to Daniel's message, to the casual way he'd called her Soph, a nickname that somehow felt more intimate than any endearment Michael had ever used. She found herself scrolling back through their text history, months of quick check-ins about clients, shared jokes and photos of campaign mock-ups sent back and forth at all hours. When had their professional relationship become so personal? When had Daniel started being the first person she wanted to share good news with? She set down her phone with more force than necessary. This was exactly the kind of thinking that destroyed partnerships. Michael was right to feel secure. Their relationship was built on rational choices and mutual respect. What she had with Daniel was just an intense working relationship. But as she prepared for bed, Sophia caught herself wondering what Daniel was doing at that exact moment. Was he reviewing tomorrow's presentation? Was he thinking about their upcoming client dinner, the way she found herself anticipating their daily coffee meetings? "Stop," she commanded herself, but the questions lingered like whispers in the dark. The next morning would bring new challenges, new opportunities to work alongside Daniel, and new chances for her carefully constructed walls to be tested. Because sometimes, the most dangerous feelings were the ones that crept up slowly, disguised as friendship and professional respect. Sometimes, the heart wanted what it had been trying so hard to deny. The grocery bags rustled against Sophia's hip as she fumbled with her keys outside Michael's apartment door. A smile played at her lips as she imagined his surprise. She'd left work early for the first time in months, picked up ingredients for his favorite pasta dish, and even grabbed a bottle of the wine they'd shared on their first date. Maybe Michael had been right about her prioritizing work too much. Tonight would be different. Tonight would be about them. The key turned smoothly in the lock, and Sophia pushed the door open, already calling out, "Michael, I know you weren't expecting me, but I thought we could—" The words died in her throat. Clothes scattered across the hardwood floor like breadcrumbs, leading to a devastating truth. A woman's blazer she didn't recognize, Michael's shirt crumpled beside the couch, and from the bedroom, sounds that made her blood freeze in her veins. The grocery bag slipped from her numb fingers, hitting the floor with a crash that seemed to echo through her chest. Apples rolled across the entryway, and the wine bottle somehow remained intact, though everything else in Sophia's world had just shattered. "Oh God, Michael." A breathless female voice drifted from the bedroom, young and unfamiliar, followed by Michael's unmistakable groan of pleasure. Sophia's legs moved without conscious thought, carrying her toward the partially open bedroom door, even as her mind screamed at her to run. Some masochistic part of her needed to see it, needed the visual confirmation that would make this nightmare real. Through the crack in the door she saw them, Michael's familiar form moving over a petite brunette who couldn't be older than 23. The girl's face was flushed with passion, her small hands gripping Michael's shoulders as she arched beneath him with an abandon that Sophia had never managed in their 8 months together. "Sarah," Michael whispered against the girl's neck, his voice thick with desire. "You drive me crazy." Sarah, the new intern at Michael's firm. Sophia had met her just 2 weeks ago at the company holiday party, had even complimented her ambition and fresh perspective. The girl had smiled sweetly and thanked Sophia for being so understanding about Michael's long work hours. The irony was a knife twisting in her gut. Sophia backed away from the door, her hand clamped over her mouth to keep from making a sound. Her vision blurred, whether from tears or shock she couldn't tell. The walls seemed to be closing in, the familiar apartment suddenly foreign and suffocating. She turned and fled, leaving the scattered groceries behind, like evidence of her naive hopes. Her hands shook as she jabbed the elevator button repeatedly, desperate to escape before they discovered her presence. The last thing she wanted was a confrontation, explanations, or Michael's inevitable excuses. The elevator descended in slow motion, each floor marking another level of her humiliation. How long had this been going on? How many times had Michael looked her in the eye and lied? How many late nights at the office had actually been late nights with Sarah? The parking garage felt like a tomb as Sophia stumbled toward her car, muscle memory guiding her movements while her mind reeled. She sat behind the wheel for long minutes, staring at nothing, her entire body trembling with the aftershock of betrayal. Her phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. Client dinner went great. Morrison Group loved the Revise campaign. Hope your surprise for Michael goes well. You deserve happiness, Soph. The kindness in his message, the casual affection, the way he always seemed to know exactly what to say. It all felt like salt in her wounds now, because this was what real care looked like, wasn't it? This thoughtfulness, this genuine concern for her happiness. Not whatever hollow performance Michael had been giving her for months. Sophia started the car with shaking hands, not knowing where to go. She couldn't go home. Her apartment felt too small, too quiet, too full of reminders of the future she'd been planning with Michael. She couldn't go to her parents. They'd never understood her choices anyway. She couldn't call her few close friends. They all loved Michael, thought he was perfect for her. So she drove. Through downtown streets slick with evening rain, past restaurants where couples shared intimate dinners, past the coffee shop where she and Michael had met for their first official date. Everything looked different now, filtered through the lens of betrayal. Had he been thinking about Sarah even then? Her phone rang. Michael's ringtone filled the car, and Sophia nearly swerved into oncoming traffic. She let it go to voicemail, then watched in horrified fascination as he called again. And again. Finally, she pulled over in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner and listened to his messages. Sophia? Hey, I just saw, did you come by? Your groceries are here and Shit, please call me back. We need to talk. The second message was more frantic. Soph, please, I can explain everything. It's not what you think. Sarah means nothing to me. You have to believe that. Please just come back so we can talk this through. The third message broke something inside her. I know you're hurt and you have every right to be, but please don't throw away everything we have over one mistake. I love you, Sophia. I love what we've built together. Don't let this ruin us. One mistake. As if cheating was something that just happened to him, like catching a cold or getting caught in traffic. As if the deliberate choice to betray her trust was merely an unfortunate accident. Sophia deleted the messages without listening to the rest. Her hands were steadier now, though her heart felt like it had been put through a shredder. The rain drummed against her windshield, matching the rhythm of her scattered thoughts. She thought about the way Sarah had looked at Michael, the raw passion in their movements, the way he'd whispered her name like a prayer. When was the last time Michael had looked at Sophia that way? When was the last time he'd touched her with such desperate need? The truth was devastating in its simplicity. He never had. Their relationship had been built on compatibility, on paper-perfect compatibility that looked good to everyone else, but had never truly set either of them on fire. She'd mistaken stability for love, safety for passion, but that didn't make the betrayal hurt any less. It didn't excuse the lies, the deception, the way he'd made her question her own instincts when she'd sensed something was wrong. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from an unknown number. Sophia, this is Sarah. I'm so sorry you had to find out this way. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. Michael told me you two were practically over, that you were just going through the motions. I know that doesn't excuse anything, but I thought you should know. The message hit like a physical blow. Michael had been discussing their relationship with his lover, painting Sophia as some pathetic woman clinging to a dead relationship. How dare he rewrite their history to justify his betrayal? But even worse was the tiny voice in her head that whispered, what if Sarah was right? What if they had just been going through the motions? Sophia turned off her phone and stared out at the rain-soaked parking lot, feeling more lost and alone than she had in years. Everything she thought she knew about her life, Her relationship, her future, all of it had been built on lies. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled, and Sophia realized she had absolutely no idea where to go from here. The rain had stopped by the time Sophia found herself standing outside her apartment building, though she couldn't remember driving home. Her clothes clung to her damp skin, and her hair hung in wet tendrils around her face. She must have walked through the rain at some point, though the whole evening felt like fragments of a nightmare she couldn't quite piece together. Her hands trembled as she tried to fit her key into the lock, missing twice before finally managing to open the door. The familiar scent of her vanilla candles hit her like a wave, and suddenly she was sobbing. Deep, gut-wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere primal and raw. Sophia collapsed onto her couch, still wearing her damp coat, and let the tears come. 8 months of her life. 8 months of planning a future with someone who had been living a lie. She thought about the weekend getaway they'd booked for next month, the way she'd started keeping extra clothes at his place, the conversations about maybe moving in together by spring. All of it had been happening while he was sleeping with Sarah. Her phone, which she'd turned back on during the drive home, buzzed incessantly with Michael's calls and texts. She didn't have the strength to look at them, but she couldn't bring herself to turn it off either. Part of her wondered if he might say something, anything that could make sense of this devastation. The apartment felt too quiet, too empty. Every corner seemed to echo with memories of Michael. The kitchen counter where he'd made her breakfast last Sunday, the spot on the couch where he always sat during their movie nights, the framed photo of them at last year's Christmas party that now felt like evidence of her own foolishness. A soft knock at her door made her freeze. Her heart hammered against her ribs as worst-case scenarios flooded her mind. What if Michael had come to explain? What if he was standing in her hallway with flowers and apologies, ready to gaslight her into believing this was somehow her fault? The knock came again, gentler this time, followed by a familiar voice that made her chest tighten with relief. "Soph, it's me. Are you okay? Your car's in the parking lot, but you haven't been answering my texts." Daniel. Of course it was Daniel, the one person who would notice her absence, who would worry when she didn't respond. She wanted to answer, but her voice seemed trapped somewhere beneath the weight of her humiliation. "I'm coming in," Daniel said after another moment of silence. "I still have your spare key from when you went out of town last month." The sound of the key turning in the lock was followed by Daniel's cautious footsteps. Sophia heard him pause in the entryway, probably taking in the sight of her scattered purse contents and damp coat thrown carelessly on the floor. Jesus, Sophia, what happened? She couldn't bring herself to look at him, couldn't bear to see the concern in his eyes when she felt so utterly broken. Instead, she pulled her knees to her chest and buried her face against them, making herself as small as possible. The couch dipped as Daniel sat beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth, but careful not to touch her without permission. That small consideration, his instinctive understanding of her need for space, made her cry harder. "Hey," he said softly, his voice like a balm against her raw nerves. "Whatever it is, we'll figure it out. Just breathe, okay?" "I can't," she whispered into her knees. "I can't breathe. I can't think. I can't—" "Yes, you can," Daniel said firmly but gently. "Look at me, Soph." Slowly she raised her head to meet his gaze. His dark eyes were filled with such genuine concern that it nearly undid her all over again. There was no judgment there, no questions about why she looked like a drowned cat or why she was falling apart in her living room. "There you are," he said, offering her a small smile. "Now tell me what happened." The words came out in broken fragments at first. How she'd wanted to surprise Michael. How she'd found the clothes scattered in his entryway. How she'd seen him with Sarah. Heard him whisper her name with a passion he'd never shown Sophia. Daniel listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each detail. When she told him about Sarah's text message, about Michael's voicemails painting her as pathetic, Daniel's hands clenched into fists against his thighs. "That bastard," he said quietly, and there was something dangerous in his tone that Sophia had never heard before. "That absolute bastard." "Don't," Sophia said quickly. "Please don't say what everyone's going to say. That I'm better off without him. That he didn't deserve me, that I should have seen it coming. Were you going to say those things?" Because they might be true, but they don't help right now. Right now I just feel stupid and used and... Sophia. Daniel's voice cut through her rambling with gentle authority. I wasn't going to say any of that. She blinked at him in surprise. You weren't? No, he said, shifting closer. I was going to say that Michael Hayes is the biggest fool who ever lived, because he had something precious and he threw it away for something cheap, and that if I ever see him again, I'm going to have a very hard time not punching him in his perfect architect face. Despite everything, Sophia felt her lips twitch with the ghost of a smile. You've never been in a fight in your life? There's a first time for everything, Daniel said solemnly. Then his expression softened. And I was going to say that you're allowed to feel however you feel about this. Angry, sad, betrayed, confused, all of it. You don't have to be gracious or understanding or anything else that people expect from you. The permission to fall apart completely, given so freely and without conditions, broke something open inside her chest. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but these felt different, cleaner somehow, like a wound finally being allowed to bleed. Daniel reached over and gently brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. The touch was soft, careful, nothing like the casual way Michael had touched her. This felt reverent, like Daniel understood exactly how fragile she was in this moment. Can I hold you? He asked quietly. Just until you stop shaking. Sophia realized she was shaking, had been shaking since she'd left Michael's apartment. She nodded wordlessly, and Daniel carefully gathered her into his arms, settling her against his chest as if she were made of spun glass. She'd been hugged by Daniel before, quick embraces after successful client presentations, congratulatory squeezes when they'd landed big accounts. But this was different. This was Daniel wrapping himself around her like a shield against the world, his hand stroking her hair with infinite patience while she soaked his shirt with her tears. He smelled like coffee and his familiar cologne, mixed with something that was purely him. Safe. He smelled safe. I've got you, he murmured against the top of her head. I'm not going anywhere. For the first time since she'd walked into Michael's apartment, Sophia felt like she could breathe. The weight of betrayal was still crushing, the pain still acute, but somehow in Daniel's arms it felt manageable. They sat like that for a long time, until her tears slowed and her breathing evened out. Until the shaking stopped, and she could think beyond the immediate devastation. And slowly, as the shock began to wear off, Sophia became aware of other things. The steady rhythm of Daniel's heartbeat against her ear, the way his fingers moved through her hair like he'd been doing it forever, the fact that he'd dropped everything to come to her, that he'd known exactly what she needed without being told. When had Daniel become her safe harbor? When had his presence become the thing that could calm her storms? The question stirred something in her chest that had nothing to do with Michael's betrayal, and everything to do with the man currently holding her like she was the most precious thing in his world. Something that felt dangerous and wonderful and completely terrifying all at once. The silence between them had grown comfortable, weighted with unspoken understanding rather than awkwardness. Sophia remained curled against Daniel's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing as the evening settled around them like a soft blanket. The storm outside had passed, leaving only the gentle patter of raindrops against her windows. I should probably let you get some rest, Daniel said quietly, though his arms didn't loosen around her. It's been a hell of a day. Don't, Sophia whispered, her fingers unconsciously gripping his shirt. Please don't go yet. I don't want to be alone. The vulnerability in her voice surprised them both. Sophia had always prided herself on her independence, her ability to handle whatever life threw at her. But tonight, the thought of Daniel leaving felt unbearable. I'm not going anywhere, he assured her, settling back against the couch cushions. I'll stay as long as you need me to. Sophia pulled back slightly to look at him, studying the familiar features that had become such a constant in her life. The strong line of his jaw softened now with concern, the warm brown eyes that had always seen her more clearly than she saw herself, the mouth that had spoken countless words of encouragement, shared countless inside jokes, defended her ideas in client meetings when others doubted. When had he become so essential to her world? Daniel, she began, then stopped, not sure how to voice the thoughts tumbling through her mind. Can I ask you something? Anything. Why did you come here tonight? Really? She searched his face as she spoke. You could have just texted back when I didn't answer. You could have assumed I was busy with Michael. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, his thumb absently tracing patterns on her shoulder. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. Because I know you, he said simply. I know that when you're excited about something, you text in all caps. I know that when you're stressed, you send paragraph-long messages about client deadlines. And I know that when you go completely silent, especially after being so happy about surprising Michael, he paused, meeting her gaze. Something's wrong. The depth of his observation, the way he'd catalogued her habits and moods without her even realizing it, made her chest tighten with emotion. Michael had been with her for 8 months and had never noticed half the things Daniel just described. You pay attention, she said, wonder creeping into her voice. To you. Always. The admission hung between them, loaded with meaning that neither of them had dared acknowledge before. Sophia felt her breath catch. The way he was looking at her now, like she was something precious, something worth protecting, made her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with the night's trauma, and everything to do with the man holding her. Daniel, she whispered, not sure what she was asking, but knowing she needed to say his name. I know, he said quietly, his hand moving to cup her face. I know this is complicated. I know the timing is terrible. I know you're hurt and vulnerable, and I shouldn't... Shouldn't what? The question came out barely audible. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, wiping away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. Shouldn't tell you that seeing you in pain tonight made me want to tear Michael apart with my bare hands. Shouldn't admit that I've been in love with you for longer than I care to remember. Shouldn't want to kiss you when your world just fell apart. The confession hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath and making her heart hammer against her ribs. You... what? I love you, Daniel repeated, his voice steady despite the fear she could see in his eyes. I've loved you since the 2nd year of our partnership, when you stayed up all night helping me prepare for my father's funeral speech. I've loved you through every client victory, every late-night strategy session, every time you've doubted yourself when you're the most brilliant person I know. Sophia stared at him, her mind reeling. But you never said anything. You never even hinted. Because I was terrified of losing you, he admitted. Our friendship, our partnership, everything we've built together. I'd rather have you in my life as my business partner and best friend than not have you at all. And now? Daniel's eyes searched her face, as if trying to memorize every detail. Now I'm watching you fall apart because some bastard couldn't see what he had, and I can't pretend anymore that I don't want to be the one to put you back together. The intensity in his voice, the raw honesty of his words made something deep inside Sophia's chest crack open. All those moments over the years, the lingering glances, the touches that lasted a beat too long, the way he always seemed to know exactly what she needed, suddenly took on new meaning. Daniel, she breathed, her hand moving to rest against his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath her palm. I'm sorry, he said quickly, misreading her expression. I shouldn't have told you tonight. You don't need this complication right now. I can go give you space to process everything. No, Sophia said firmly, her hand fisting in his shirt to keep him from pulling away. Don't apologize. Don't you dare apologize for being the one person who's never let me down. Their faces were inches apart now, close enough that she could feel his breath against her lips, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, to count the faint freckles across his nose that she'd somehow never noticed before. Sophia, he warned softly, if you're thinking what I think you're thinking, what am I thinking? She whispered, surprised by the breathiness of her own voice. That you want me to kiss you. His voice was rough with want and restraint. And I need you to be sure, because once I do, everything changes between us. There's no going back to just being business partners. She looked into his eyes, seeing the love he'd been hiding for years, the patience he'd shown while she stumbled through relationships with men who never truly saw her. Daniel had been there through everything, her victories and failures, her doubts and triumphs. He'd believed in her when she didn't believe in herself, supported her dreams, even when they meant long hours that pulled her away from everything else. He'd been loving her all along, hadn't he? in 1,000 small ways she'd been too blind or too scared to recognize. "I'm sure," she whispered, her free hand moving to trace the line of his jaw. "I'm so tired of being safe, Daniel. I'm tired of settling for what makes sense instead of what makes me feel alive." Something shifted in his expression, relief and desire, and something deeper that made her stomach flutter with anticipation. "Are you sure?" he asked one more time, giving her every opportunity to change her mind. Instead of answering with words, Sophia closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that was nothing like the careful, controlled affection she'd shared with Michael. This was fire and need and years of suppressed longing, finally given permission to burn. Daniel's response was immediate and overwhelming. His arms tightened around her, one hand tangling in her hair while the other pulled her closer, as if he couldn't bear even the smallest space between them. He kissed her like she was oxygen, and he'd been drowning, like she was everything he'd ever wanted and had finally been given permission to claim. Sophia melted into him, her body coming alive in ways she'd forgotten were possible. Every nerve ending sparked with electricity, every touch sent shockwaves through her system. This was what passion felt like, not the lukewarm contentment she'd mistaken for love, but this consuming fire that threatened to burn away everything she thought she knew about herself. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sophia looked into Daniel's eyes and saw her future written there. Not the safe, predictable future she'd been planning with Michael, but something wild and uncertain and absolutely right. "Everything just changed, didn't it?" she whispered against his lips. "Everything," Daniel confirmed, his forehead resting against hers, "and I can't bring myself to regret it." Neither could she. Despite the chaos of the evening, despite the betrayal that had brought her to this moment, Sophia couldn't regret the way her heart was racing or the way her body felt electric and alive in Daniel's arms. But even as she lost herself in the feeling of finally being where she belonged, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered warnings about rebound relationships and vulnerable decisions made in moments of crisis. Tomorrow would bring questions, complications, and the harsh light of reality. But tonight, wrapped in Daniel's arms with the taste of possibility on her lips, Sophia chose to let herself fall. Morning sunlight streamed through Sophia's bedroom curtains, casting golden patterns across the rumpled sheets where she lay staring at the ceiling. Daniel's arm was draped across her waist, his breathing deep and even against her neck. The events of the previous night came flooding back in vivid detail. Michael's betrayal, her devastation, Daniel's confession, and the way her world had tilted on its axis when his lips touched hers. What followed had been a night of passion, unlike anything she'd ever experienced. Daniel had worshipped her body like it was sacred, whispered her name like a prayer, showed her what it meant to be truly seen and cherished. Every touch had been reverent, every kiss a promise, every moment between them charged with years of suppressed longing finally set free. But now, in the harsh light of morning, panic crept through her veins like ice water. What have I done? Sophia carefully extracted herself from Daniel's embrace, her heart clenching when he mumbled her name in his sleep, and reached for her. She pulled on her robe and padded to the kitchen, her hands shaking as she started the coffee maker. The familiar routine felt foreign now, everything tinged with the knowledge that she'd crossed a line she could never uncross. Her phone sat on the counter where she'd abandoned it the night before, and she could see the screen lighting up with notifications. 17 missed calls from Michael, 12 text messages, 3 voicemails. Each notification felt like an accusation. The coffee maker gurgled to life, and Sophia gripped the counter's edge, trying to steady herself. Last night, she'd been devastated, vulnerable, not thinking clearly. She'd let her emotions overwhelm her judgment. And now everything was ruined. "Good morning, beautiful." Daniel's voice, rough with sleep and affection, made her whirl around. He stood in the doorway wearing nothing but his boxers and a smile that could have powered the entire city. The sight of him, tousled hair, satisfied expression, looking completely at home in her kitchen, sent a bolt of desire through her that was immediately followed by a wave of guilt so intense it made her nauseous. "Daniel," she began, then stopped, not knowing how to voice the chaos in her head. His smile faded as he took in her expression. "Hey, what's wrong? Are you okay?" This, she said, gesturing between them, this was a mistake. The words hung in the air like a slap. Daniel's face went carefully blank, but she could see the hurt flash through his eyes before he controlled his expression. A mistake, he repeated slowly. Yes, Sophia said, her voice gaining strength as panic fueled her conviction. Last night I was emotional. I wasn't thinking clearly. I just found out my boyfriend was cheating on me, and I let my vulnerability cloud my judgment. Your vulnerability, Daniel said, his tone dangerously quiet. Is that what you're calling it? I was hurt and confused, and you were there, and you said all those things. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling exposed despite her robe. I took advantage of your feelings for me. It wasn't fair to either of us. Daniel stepped closer, his eyes searching her face. Sophia, look at me and tell me that what happened between us last night felt like a mistake to you. Tell me that when I kissed you, when I touched you, when you called my name, tell me that felt wrong. She couldn't meet his gaze. Because the truth was that nothing had ever felt more right than being in Daniel's arms. Her body was still humming with the memory of his touch, her lips still tingling from his kisses. Even now, looking at him standing in her kitchen, she wanted nothing more than to close the distance between them and lose herself in his embrace again. But that was exactly the problem. It doesn't matter how it felt, she said firmly. We have a business to run together. We have employees counting on us, clients who trust us. And we can't just blow up our entire professional relationship because of one night of poor judgment. Poor judgment? Daniel's voice cracked slightly. Sophia, I told you I've been in love with you for years. You think that was poor judgment talking? I think you saw me falling apart and your protective instincts kicked in, she replied, the lie tasting bitter on her tongue. And I think I was so desperate to feel wanted after what Michael did that I misinterpreted friendship for something more. The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel stared at her for a long moment, and she could see him processing her words, see the exact moment her rejection hit home. Friendship, he said finally. That's what you think last night was? Sophia forced herself to nod, even as her heart screamed in protest. Daniel let out a harsh laugh that held no humor. You know what, Sophia? You're right, we do have a business to run, employees counting on us, clients who trust us. He turned toward the bedroom, then paused. But don't insult my intelligence by pretending that what happened between us was anything less than real. And don't insult yours by pretending you didn't feel it too. She listened to him move around her bedroom, gathering his clothes, and had to bite her lip to keep from calling out to him. This was for the best. This was protecting everything they'd built together. This was the rational, responsible choice. So why did it feel like she was making the biggest mistake of her life? When Daniel emerged from the bedroom, fully dressed, and looking like the professional businessman she'd worked alongside for 7 years, the transformation was jarring. Gone was the tender lover who had held her through the night. In his place stood her business partner, polite and distant. I'll see you at the office, he said, his voice carefully neutral. We have the Henderson presentation at 10. Daniel, wait. But he was already gone, the sound of her front door closing echoing through the apartment like a gunshot. Sophia sank onto her couch, the same couch where Daniel had held her while she cried, where he'd confessed his love, where everything had started to change. Her phone buzzed with another text from Michael, but she couldn't bring herself to look at it. Instead, she sat in the silence of her apartment and tried to convince herself that she'd done the right thing. That protecting their business partnership was worth sacrificing whatever they might have had together. That she could go back to seeing Daniel as just her friend and colleague, pretending that she didn't know how it felt to have his hands on her skin or his name on her lips. But even as she tried to rebuild the walls between them, Sophia couldn't shake the image of Daniel's face when she'd called their night together a mistake. The hurt in his eyes would haunt her, she knew, just like the memory of his touch, the sound of his voice whispering her name, the way he'd looked at her like she was his entire world. She'd chosen safety over passion, logic over love, just like she always did. The question was, how long could she live with that choice before it destroyed her? As if summoned by her thoughts, her phone rang. Daniel's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment, hope fluttered in her chest. Maybe he was calling to fight for them, to refuse to accept her rejection. Henderson moved the meeting to this afternoon. His voice was crisp, professional. I'll email you the updated presentation slides. We should probably arrive separately to avoid any awkwardness. The formality in his tone cut deeper than any argument would have. This was Daniel putting distance between them, protecting himself the only way he knew how. Of course, she managed. That makes sense. I'll see you there, Ms. Chen. Ms. Chen, not Soph, not Sophia. The formal address felt like a door slamming shut. As the line went dead, Sophia realized that in trying to preserve their partnership, she might have destroyed the very foundation it was built on. Because how could they go back to being just friends when she now knew exactly what she was giving up? How could she look at Daniel across conference tables and not remember the way he'd kissed her? How could she work late nights beside him and not think about the way he'd held her? The answer was simple. She couldn't, but she was going to have to try. Because the alternative, admitting that she'd made a terrible mistake, that she wanted him more than she'd ever wanted anything, felt too dangerous to consider, even if her heart was already breaking from the effort of denying it. 2 weeks passed in excruciating politeness. 2 weeks of "Good morning, Ms. Chen," and "Have you reviewed the Morrison files, Mr. Martinez?" 2 weeks of careful distance and professional courtesy that felt like a slow death by 1,000 cuts. Sophia threw herself into work with desperate intensity, staying late every night to avoid the emptiness of her apartment, taking on new projects to keep her mind occupied. But no amount of busy work could erase the memory of Daniel's touch or the way her heart lurched every time he walked into a room. The worst part was how seamlessly he'd slipped back into the role of professional colleague. Gone was any trace of the man who had held her while she cried, who had confessed his love with trembling hands and desperate eyes. In his place was a polite stranger who spoke to her only when necessary and never, ever met her gaze for longer than required. Their team noticed. Of course they noticed. Maya, their assistant, kept shooting worried glances between them during meetings. The creative team had started walking on eggshells, sensing the tension that crackled in the air whenever Sophia and Daniel were in the same room. But somehow, they'd managed to maintain the facade. Until today. Sophia was in her office, staring blankly at quarterly reports, when her door burst open without warning. Daniel stood in the doorway, his usually perfect composure cracked, his dark eyes blazing with an emotion she couldn't quite read. "We need to talk," he said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him with more force than necessary. "I'm busy," Sophia replied automatically, not looking up from her computer screen. "If this is about the Caldwell campaign..." "It's not about the damn campaign, and you know it." Daniel's voice was rough, strained. "We can't keep doing this, Sophia." "Doing what?" She finally looked up, trying to project calm professionalism even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "We're working together perfectly fine." "Fine?" Daniel laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You call this fine? We can barely be in the same room together. Our team is walking around like they're afraid we're going to explode. Our productivity has dropped 20% because we're both too busy pretending the other doesn't exist." Sophia stood up, crossing her arms defensively. "The numbers don't support that assessment." "Fuck the numbers, Sophia!" The curse exploded from him with such force that she took a step back. Daniel never swore in the office, never lost his temper. The fact that she'd driven him to this point made something twist painfully in her chest. "Don't raise your voice at me," she said, but her words lacked conviction. "Then stop hiding behind spreadsheets and quarterly reports and talk to me like a human being." Daniel stepped closer, and she could see the exhaustion etched in the lines around his eyes, the way his usually perfect hair was disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it. "I can't do this anymore. I can't pretend that nothing happened between us. I can't pretend that I don't love you. Daniel, please." "No," he cut her off, his voice breaking slightly. "You've had 2 weeks to convince yourself that what we shared was a mistake, but I've had 2 weeks to realize that letting you push me away was the real mistake." Sophia felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. The pain in his voice, the raw honesty in his expression. It was everything she'd been trying so hard to avoid. "Our partnership," she began weakly. "Our partnership was built on friendship, respect, and trust," Daniel said, moving closer until he was standing directly in front of her desk. "All things that we still have, despite your best efforts to destroy them." I haven't destroyed anything. I'm trying to protect what we've built. By shutting me out? By pretending that 7 years of friendship means nothing? His hands pressed flat against her desk as he leaned forward. By lying to yourself about what you feel? I'm not lying about anything, Sophia said, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Aren't you? Daniel's eyes searched her face with an intensity that made her want to hide. Look me in the eye and tell me you don't think about that night. Tell me you don't remember how it felt when I kissed you, when I touched you. Tell me you don't wake up reaching for me. Heat flooded her cheeks, and she looked away, unable to meet his gaze. Because he was right. She did think about that night, constantly. She did remember every touch, every kiss, every whispered word, and she did wake up reaching for him, her body aching with the memory of his hands on her skin. I can't tell you that, she whispered. Then why are you fighting this? Daniel asked, his voice gentler now. Why are you fighting us? Sophia closed her eyes, trying to marshal her defenses. Because I'm scared, okay? I'm terrified that if we try this and it doesn't work out, I'll lose everything. I'll lose my business partner, my best friend, the most important person in my life. And what if it does work out? Daniel asked quietly. What if we're meant to be more than just business partners? What if we're meant to be everything to each other? The possibility hung between them like a lifeline, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Sophia wanted to reach for it, wanted to believe that they could have it all. Love and partnership, passion and friendship, everything she'd been afraid to want. I don't know how to do this, she admitted, finally meeting his eyes. I don't know how to risk everything for love. You don't have to risk everything, Daniel said, moving around the desk until he was standing directly in front of her. You just have to trust me. Trust us? He reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and cupped her face in his hands. The touch was gentle, reverent, and Sophia felt herself melting despite her best intentions. I've been in love with you for years, he said, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. That's not going to change if we try dating and it doesn't work out. That's not going to change if you reject me again. My feelings for you aren't conditional on whether you return them. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she realized she was crying, not from sadness this time, but from the overwhelming relief of finally hearing the truth spoken aloud. I'm so scared, she whispered. I know, Daniel said, pressing his forehead against hers. But I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of loving you in silence. I'm tired of watching you date men who don't deserve you while I stand on the sidelines wishing I had the courage to fight for you. Daniel. I'm in love with you, Sophia Chen, he said firmly. I'm in love with your brilliant mind and your generous heart and the way you laugh when you think no one is listening. I'm in love with your terrible coffee-making skills and your obsession with perfectly organized files and the way you scrunch your nose when you're concentrating. Each word hit her like a physical blow, breaking down the last of her resistance. Because this was what she'd been running from. Not the possibility of failure, but the terrifying, wonderful possibility of being truly known and loved by someone who saw every part of her. I love you too, she whispered, the admission torn from somewhere deep in her chest. God help me. I love you too. The words hung in the air between them for a heartbeat before Daniel's mouth crashed against hers in a kiss that was desperate and hungry and full of 2 weeks' worth of suppressed longing. Sophia melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt as she kissed him back with everything she had. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Daniel rested his forehead against hers and smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him since that morning in her kitchen. So what now? Sophia asked, her voice shaky with emotion and possibility. Now we figure it out, Daniel said simply. Together. But even as she nodded, even as hope bloomed in her chest like a flower after rain, Sophia couldn't quite shake the feeling that admitting their love was only the beginning. The real test would be learning how to love each other while building a life together, professionally and personally. The question was, were they brave enough to try? But the confession, as beautiful as it had been, changed nothing. Sophia pulled away from Daniel's embrace, reality crashing back over her like cold water. The office walls seemed to close in around them, reminding her of where they were, what they stood to lose if anyone had overheard their heated exchange. I can't, she whispered, stepping back until her legs hit her desk chair. I can't do this. Not here. Not like this. Daniel's expression shifted from hope to confusion to something dangerously close to anger. What are you saying? I'm saying that loving you and being able to act on it are two different things, Sophia said, wrapping her arms around herself like armor. Nothing has changed, Daniel. We still work together. We still have responsibilities, employees, clients who depend on us maintaining our professionalism. So we maintain it, Daniel said, his voice strained with forced patience. We can separate our personal and professional lives. Other couples do it all the time. Other couples don't run a business together, Sophia shot back. Other couples don't have everything they've built hanging in the balance. Daniel stared at her for a long moment, and she could see him processing her words, see the exact moment he realized what she was really saying. You're choosing the business over us, he said quietly. Again. I'm choosing stability over chaos. I'm choosing what makes sense over what feels good in the moment. Jesus, Sophia. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, his composure finally cracking completely. Do you hear yourself? You're talking about love like it's a business risk to be managed. The accusation stung because it was partially true, but Sophia had learned long ago that feelings were unreliable, that passion burned hot and fast before inevitably burning out. What they had built together at Visionary Creative was solid, real, lasting. It was worth protecting. Maybe that's because love is a risk, she said, her voice growing colder as she rebuilt her walls. And I've already taken enough risks for one lifetime. Something shifted in Daniel's expression then, a door closing, a light going out. When he spoke again, his voice was eerily calm. I see, he said. Well, thank you for clarifying your position. I won't make the mistake of misreading the situation again. Daniel, that's not what I... No, I think you've been perfectly clear, he interrupted, already moving toward the door. You love me, but not enough to take a chance on us. You value our business partnership more than any personal relationship we might have. Message received. He paused with his hand on the door handle, not turning around. For what it's worth, I don't regret telling you how I feel. I don't regret fighting for us, but I won't make the mistake of doing it again. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded more final than any slam would have. Sophia sank into her chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. The silence in her office was deafening, broken only by the soft hum of her computer and the distant sounds of the office beyond her walls. She had won, hadn't she? She had protected their business, maintained their professional relationship, chosen logic over emotion. So why did victory feel so much like loss? The days that followed were a masterclass in emotional endurance. Daniel didn't just retreat into professional courtesy this time, he disappeared entirely from her personal orbit. Their interactions became limited to absolutely necessary business communications, delivered with the kind of clinical detachment usually reserved for strangers. He stopped bringing her coffee in the mornings, stopped staying late to review presentations together, stopped asking her opinion on anything that wasn't directly work-related. Most painfully, he stopped using her nickname altogether, referring to her only as Sophia when he had to address her directly, and more often simply avoiding the need to say her name at all. The loss of their easy intimacy was like losing a limb. Sophia found herself turning to share a joke with him during meetings, only to be met with polite indifference. She caught herself saving up funny stories from her day to tell him, then remembering that he was no longer someone she could share those moments with. The office, once filled with their collaborative energy and shared laughter, became a tomb of professional efficiency. Their team walked on eggshells, clearly sensing the shift, but unable to understand what had changed. Maya stopped scheduling their usual Monday morning strategy sessions together. The creative team began directing questions to them separately rather than as a unit. Even their work suffered. The natural flow of ideas that had always existed between them dried up like a river in drought. They could still function as business partners. They were both too professional to let their personal issues destroy their clients' campaigns. But the magic was gone. The spark that had made Visionary Creative special, that had set them apart from every other agency in the city, had been extinguished. Sophia told herself it would get easier, that the ache in her chest would fade, that she would stop listening for Daniel's voice in the hallway, that she would stop dreaming about him every night. But 3 weeks passed, then 4, and if anything, the pain grew sharper. She found herself working even later, partly to avoid going home to her empty apartment, partly because being in the office when Daniel wasn't there was the only time she felt like she could breathe freely. The building after hours held the ghost of their old partnership. She could almost pretend in the quiet darkness that things were the way they used to be. It was during one of these late-night sessions that she overheard a conversation that stopped her cold. "I'm telling you, something happened between them," Maya was saying to James from the creative team. Sophia froze outside the break room, not wanting to eavesdrop, but unable to walk away. "They've always been close," James replied. "Maybe they're just stressed about the Morrison renewal." "This is different," Maya insisted. "They used to be like, I don't know, like two halves of the same brain. Now they can barely look at each other. And have you seen how miserable they both look? Sophia's lost weight, and Daniel looks like he hasn't slept in weeks." "You think they had a fight?" "I think they're in love with each other, and too stupid to do anything about it," Maya said bluntly. "It's painful to watch, honestly. They're destroying themselves and everything around them because they're too scared to admit what everyone else can see." Sophia pressed her back against the wall outside the break room, Maya's words hitting her like physical blows. Was it really that obvious? Could everyone see the wreckage of what they'd lost? More importantly, was Maya right? Were they destroying everything in their attempt to preserve it? That night, Sophia lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Maya's words echoing in her head. She thought about the Daniel she'd known for 7 years, the man who brought her soup when she was sick, who remembered every important date in her life, who had built their dream company alongside her with patience and vision and unwavering faith in their partnership. She thought about the Daniel who had held her while she cried, who had confessed his love with trembling hands, who had fought for them even when she'd given him every reason to walk away. And she thought about the stranger he'd become. Polite, distant, professionally competent but personally unreachable. A man who looked through her rather than at her, who had withdrawn not just his love, but his friendship, his warmth, his very essence from her life. She had chosen safety, but what she'd received instead was a hollow existence that felt less like living and more like slowly dying. She had protected their business partnership, but in doing so, she had destroyed the very foundation it was built on, their connection, their trust, their ability to work as two parts of a whole. The question that haunted her now was whether it was too late to undo the damage she'd done, whether Daniel would ever forgive her for choosing fear over love, for rejecting not just his romantic feelings, but the very core of who they were together. Outside her window, the city hummed with life. People falling in love, taking chances, building lives based on hope rather than fear. And Sophia lay alone in the dark, wondering if she had sacrificed her happiness for a security that turned out to be nothing more than an illusion. The silence stretched on, heavy with regret and the growing certainty that she had made the biggest mistake of her life. The photograph was wedged between 2 quarterly reports, forgotten until Sophia accidentally knocked over a stack of files while reaching for her coffee. It fluttered to the floor face up, and she found herself staring at a moment frozen in time. Herself and Daniel at last year's company Christmas party, his arm around her shoulders, both of them laughing at something Maya had said. But it wasn't their laughter that made her chest tighten with recognition. It was the way Daniel was looking at her in the photo, not at the camera but at her, with an expression of such tender affection that it took her breath away. How had she missed it? How had she been so blind to what was written so clearly across his face? More photos scattered across her office floor as she knelt to gather them, each one telling the same story she'd been too scared to read. Daniel's hand on her back during a client presentation, the way he leaned toward her during strategy meetings, the soft smile he reserved just for her when she was explaining a particularly complex campaign concept. 7 years of love, documented in moments she'd dismissed as friendship. Sophia sank into her desk chair, the photos spread across her lap like pieces of a puzzle she was finally ready to solve. In every image, she could see the truth that Maya had pointed out. They had been 2 halves of the same whole, perfectly in sync, utterly devoted to each other, and she had thrown it all away because she was afraid. Her laptop chimed with an email notification, and Sophia glanced at the screen to see a message from their biggest client, Morrison Group. Her heart sank as she read the subject line, "Concerns about recent campaign performance, Ms. Chen, I wanted to reach out regarding some concerns our team has noticed with the recent campaign deliverables. While the work remains technically proficient, it seems to lack the innovative spark and collaborative energy that initially drew us to Visionary Creative. We've been discussing whether it might be time to explore other agency partnerships for our upcoming product launch. I hope we can schedule a call to discuss how to address these concerns. Best regards, Jonathan Morrison." The email felt like a physical blow. Morrison Group had been their first major client, the account that had put Visionary Creative on the map. Losing them would be devastating, both financially and professionally. But more than that, it was confirmation of what she'd already suspected. Their personal fracture was bleeding into their work, poisoning everything they'd built together. Sophia closed her laptop and picked up one of the scattered photos again, this one from the day they'd signed the Morrison contract. She remembered that afternoon vividly, how Daniel had swept her into a spontaneous hug when Jonathan called with the good news, how they'd stayed up all night planning their first campaign, fueled by Chinese takeout and pure excitement. When had she become so afraid of losing what they had that she'd destroyed it in the process of trying to protect it? The answer came to her with painful clarity, the moment she'd realized she was in love with Daniel and had chosen fear over faith. Her phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. For a wild moment she hoped it might be Daniel, that maybe he was ready to bridge the chasm between them. But Michael's name appeared on the screen instead, and Sophia felt a wave of revulsion so strong it surprised her. She'd been avoiding his calls for weeks, unable to stomach the thought of his voice after everything that had happened. But seeing his name now, juxtaposed against the photos of her real love scattered across her desk, made something crystallize in her mind. She answered the call. "Sophia. Thank God." Michael's voice was breathless with relief. "I've been trying to reach you for weeks. We need to talk. I can explain everything about Sarah." "No," Sophia interrupted, her voice calmer than she felt. "We don't need to talk, Michael. We're done. But if you'd just let me explain—" "There's nothing to explain," she said firmly. "You made your choice when you decided to sleep with Sarah. I'm making mine now." She hung up without waiting for his response and immediately blocked his number. The action felt symbolic, like closing a door on a chapter of her life that had been built on settling for less than she deserved. Sophia gathered the photos from her lap and spread them across her desk, studying each one with new eyes. In every image she could see not just Daniel's love for her, but her own feelings reflected back. The way she gravitated toward him, the way her smile was always brighter when he was near, the way she looked at him like he held the answers to every question she'd ever had. She loved him. She had always loved him, even when she'd been too afraid to admit it to herself. And more than that, she trusted him. Trusted his judgment, his integrity, his unwavering commitment to their shared dreams. So why couldn't she trust him with her heart? The question hung in the air as Sophia pulled up Daniel's contact information on her phone. Her finger hovered over his name for a long moment, uncertainty warring with determination. What if he'd moved on? What if she'd hurt him too badly for forgiveness? What if— "Stop," she commanded herself. "Stop choosing fear." Instead of calling, she grabbed her keys and headed for the door. This conversation needed to happen face to face, in the place where they'd built their dreams together. The office was nearly empty when she arrived, most of their team having left hours ago. But light spilled from under Daniel's office door, and Sophia felt her heart race as she realized he was still there. Some things never changed. Daniel had always been a night owl, doing his best creative work when the building was quiet and still. She paused outside his door, listening to the soft sound of typing from within. For a moment she was transported back to countless late nights they'd spent working side by side, the comfortable silence broken only by the occasional shared observation or burst of collaborative excitement. God, she missed him. She missed his laugh, his insight, his steady presence that had been the anchor of her professional and personal life for 7 years. She missed the way he challenged her thinking, the way he celebrated her victories, the way he believed in her even when she didn't believe in herself. Most of all, she missed the friendship that had been the foundation of everything else, the easy intimacy of two people who knew each other's thoughts, dreams, and fears. Taking a deep breath, Sophia knocked softly on his door. "Come in," Daniel's voice called, distracted and professional. She pushed open the door to find him hunched over his laptop, his dark hair falling across his forehead in a way that made her fingers itch to smooth it back. He looked up as she entered, and she saw the exact moment recognition hit. The way his expression shuttered, the careful mask sliding into place. "Sophia," he said neutrally. "Working late again?" "Actually, I came to find you," she admitted, closing the door behind her. "We need to talk." Daniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "If this is about the Morrison account, I've already drafted a response to their concerns. We can review it tomorrow during regular business hours." "It's not about Morrison," Sophia said, though the mention of their troubled client made her chest tighten with urgency. "It's about us." "There is no us," Daniel replied, his voice carefully empty of emotion. "You made that very clear." The words hit like a physical blow, but Sophia forced herself to stay steady. She'd earned his coldness, his distance. The question was whether she could earn her way back to his heart. "You're right," she said quietly. "I did make that clear. I also made the biggest mistake of my life." Daniel's typing stopped, though he didn't look up from his screen. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and carefully buried hope. "I've been thinking about something Maya said," Sophia continued, moving closer to his desk. "About how we're destroying ourselves and everything around us because we're too scared to admit what everyone else can see." This time Daniel did look up, and Sophia saw a flicker of something, surprise maybe, or the faintest hint of curiosity, before his expression went neutral again. "And what do you think everyone else sees?" he asked carefully. Sophia reached into her purse and pulled out one of the photos, the Christmas party picture, where his love for her was written so clearly across his face. She placed it on his desk, watching his expression change as he recognized the image. "They see two people who are madly in love with each other," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Two people who are perfect together, but too afraid to take the risk." Daniel stared at the photo for a long moment, then looked up at her with eyes that held years of carefully guarded hope. "And what do you see, Sophia?" The question hung between them like a bridge she could either cross or burn forever. Taking the deepest breath of her life, Sophia chose courage over fear. "I see the love of my life," she whispered, "and I see a woman who's been too scared to fight for what she wants most." The words hung in the air between them, fragile and precious and absolutely true. The silence that followed Sophia's confession stretched like a held breath, fragile and electric with possibility. Daniel stared at her across his desk, the Christmas photo lying between them like evidence of everything they'd been too afraid to acknowledge. "The love of your life," he repeated slowly, as if testing the words for truth. "Yes," Sophia whispered, her voice stronger now that the words were finally out. "The man I should have chosen years ago. The man I'm choosing now. If you'll still have me." Daniel pushed back from his desk and stood, moving around to face her directly. In the soft glow of his desk lamp, she could see the war playing out across his features. Hope battling with self-preservation, love fighting against the memory of rejection. "Sophia," he said carefully, "I need you to be sure, really sure, because I can't go through this again. I can't open my heart to you just to have you decide that our business is more important than our happiness." "I am sure," she said, stepping closer until they were barely a foot apart. "I'm sure that I love you. I'm sure that I've been miserable every day since I pushed you away. And I'm sure that protecting our business means nothing if we lose each other in the process. What about all your concerns? The employees, the clients, the risks?" "Were excuses," Sophia interrupted, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "I was scared, Daniel. Terrified of losing you. Terrified of ruining what we had. Terrified of wanting something so much that losing it would destroy me." Her thumbs brushed across his cheekbones, relearning the familiar geography of his face. "But you know what I realized tonight? I was so busy trying to avoid losing you that I lost you anyway." Daniel's hands came up to cover hers, his eyes searching her face with desperate intensity. "And the Morrison email? The business concerns? We'll figure it out," Sophia said with a conviction that surprised her. "We've overcome every other challenge together. We can overcome this one too, as partners, as lovers, as whatever we want to be. Something shifted in Daniel's expression then, the careful walls crumbling, hope blazing to life in his dark eyes. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying I love you, Daniel Martinez," Sophia said, her voice ringing with certainty. "I'm saying I want to try this, really try it. I'm saying I'm tired of being afraid and ready to be brave. And I'm saying I can't live without you anymore," she continued, the words tumbling out now like water through a broken dam. "Not as just colleagues, not as careful friends who pretend there's nothing between us. I want it all, Daniel. I want to love you openly, completely, without reservation." Daniel's restraint finally shattered. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her with 6 months of suppressed longing, years of careful distance exploding into desperate need. Sophia melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt as she kissed him back with everything she had. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Daniel rested his forehead against hers and smiled, the first real unguarded smile she'd seen from him in weeks. "So what now?" he asked, echoing her question from months ago. "How do we do this?" "Carefully," Sophia said, surprising herself with a laugh. "Thoughtfully, but not fearfully. Never fearfully again." "I like the sound of that," Daniel murmured, pressing a soft kiss to her temple. "Though I have to warn you, I'm not planning to hide how I feel about you anymore. The whole office is going to know I'm crazy about you." "Good," Sophia said firmly. "Let them know. Let everyone know." Over the following months, they did exactly that. Not with grand gestures or dramatic announcements, but with the quiet confidence of two people who had finally stopped fighting their destiny. They arrived at work together some mornings, left together some evenings. Daniel's hand would find hers during particularly stressful client meetings. Sophia would catch him looking at her across conference tables with undisguised affection. Their team noticed, of course. Maya practically glowed with satisfaction, taking credit for always knowing they belonged together. The creative department started including both of their names on birthday cards again. The tension that had been strangling their office culture evaporated, replaced by the easy energy that had always made Visionary Creative special. Most importantly, their work flourished. The spark that had been missing returned with interest, fueled by their personal happiness and professional partnership. The Morrison Group not only renewed their contract, but expanded it, specifically praising the renewed creativity and collaborative excellence they'd noticed in recent campaigns. "It's like you two are reading each other's minds again," Jonathan Morrison told them during a client dinner 6 months later. "Whatever you did to get back in sync, keep doing it." Daniel and Sophia exchanged a look across the table, secret smiles playing at their lips. If only Jonathan knew that the secret to their professional success was allowing themselves to love each other completely. That night, as they stood in the kitchen of Daniel's apartment, now their apartment, preparing dinner together, Sophia reflected on how naturally they'd fallen into domestic life. There had been challenges, certainly, learning to disagree about campaign strategies without it affecting their personal relationship, establishing boundaries between work stress and home life, figuring out how to be partners in every sense of the word. But for every challenge, there had been a dozen moments of perfect harmony. Lazy Sunday mornings spent reading the newspaper in bed, late-night strategy sessions that turned into intimate conversations about their dreams for the future, the easy intimacy of two people who knew each other's rhythms, needs, and desires. "I have something for you," Daniel said, setting down his wine glass and reaching into his jacket pocket. Sophia's heart skipped, wondering for a wild moment if he was about to propose. But what he pulled out wasn't a ring. It was a small, framed photograph. "Remember this?" he asked, handing it to her. It was the Christmas party photo that had started her journey back to him, but now it was professionally framed with a small plaque at the bottom that read, "The moment we stopped pretending." "Daniel," she breathed, touched beyond words. "I wanted you to have it," he said, moving to stand behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist, "to remind you that love isn't something to be afraid of. It's something to be celebrated." Sophia leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her back. In the reflection of the frame's glass, she could see them, two people who had nearly lost everything because they were too scared to reach for what they wanted most. "No more fear," she said softly, turning in his arms to face him. "No more fear," Daniel agreed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. just love, just us, just the life we're building together. 6 months later, Visionary Creative moved to a larger office space to accommodate their growing team. A year after that, they were featured on the cover of Marketing Week as the power couple revolutionizing creative partnerships. The article inside described their unique ability to blend personal and professional success, their innovative campaigns, and their obvious devotion to each other. But Sophia's favorite part of the article was a single quote from Daniel. "The secret to our success isn't just that we're great business partners, it's that we're best friends who fell in love. Everything else just flows from that foundation." As she read those words in their new office, watching Daniel through the glass wall as he presented to a room full of potential clients, Sophia smiled. They had taken the biggest risk of their lives, choosing love over safety, passion over predictability. And it had given them everything they'd ever dreamed of, and more than they'd ever dared to hope for. Sometimes the greatest courage was simply allowing yourself to be happy. Sometimes the best partnership was built on love. Sometimes the greatest transformation happens not when we find love, but when we finally stop running from it. Sophia discovered that the very thing she feared would destroy her partnership with Daniel was actually the missing piece that made them whole. In choosing courage over comfort, passion over predictability, she learned that true security doesn't come from avoiding risk. It comes from trusting the right person with your heart. Because sometimes what we think will break us is exactly what we need to become who we're meant to be. If this story touched you, leave your like, subscribe to our channel, and tell us in the comments, where are you listening to this story from? Your support is what allows us to keep bringing stories like this to life.